A bit of housekeeping before we get going, just to remind everyone that the conversation, it's 5 past the hour now. The conversation will kind of go for an hour and 15 minutes, and then kind of continue in what we call a cooler chat afterwards, which is unrecorded. People can hang out. We'd really, really love you to, if you're able to, switch your camera on, weigh in, join the chat. This is by no means a formal talk in that way. So it's lovely if people can either make comments on the side or better yet, come online and actually talk. Yeah, so without further ado, Jehan, I'm going to start with the very, very obvious, well, before I do you want to briefly introduce yourselves to those members of our community who may not be familiar with you? And then I'll move on to my first provocation.
Okay, great. Hi, Linda. Hi, Race. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Michelle. 2 Michelles. And hi, fellow curators, Monia, Amy, Mweni, Falguni. Very happy to have you all here. Ideally be on video and participate, because it's the conversation is really, I hope, a place where you guys can really extract these crazy strands of thought in my head and maybe give them some more shape and form through your questioning, and then of course your own responses to it. I'm Jehan Manekshaw. I founded the Drama School Mumbai here in Mumbai, and I now sit on the board, and I'm a board member of the Drama School Foundation, whereas the school runs on its own. And I've been thinking about what next and what theatre can be and can do for us. And I find myself thinking at a civilizational level rather than an individual and personal level. But I will speak more on that in a bit.
Great. Thank you, Jehan. Okay, so there's a very, very obvious place for us to start. It is indeed the end of the world as you know it. It feels like we're constantly stuck in that cycle. And of course, my dog chooses now to start barking. Please forgive the background noise.
It's fine.
Right? Still feel fine about it. And I certainly wouldn't, I think, as confidently assert that I feel fine about anything right now. I think I'm at best ambivalent about our collective prospects as a society, even as I remain hopeful, right? So my question is that qualifying phrase, you feel fine. Why do you feel fine about the world right now? What is it that makes you feel fine about our prospects at this moment?
Well, here's the funny thing. I am also going through some personal stuff right now that feels end of the world worthy. And that's caused me a lot of turmoil. And firstly, I found a conversation with Amy a few weeks ago, catching up, where I could again bring my mind out of myself and to my community, which is you guys. And then a subsequent conversation with you just made me feel better about my personal stuff, because it was just like, okay, life goes on and things go on, and it's not, everything isn't just one problem, or the problem in front of you isn't the be all and end all of it. Now, and I'm just saying that because I think it's, I was asking Ngeni before this, do I come here and put on a mask and say, I'm fine, when personally haven't been. But I just thought, we thought it would be good to just say, be honest about that, put that out there, and then look for what makes it still fine, I suppose. For me, it's the idea that there is community. My example of having a conversation in a circle with Ngeni, Amy, and others about my own personal turmoil, and then how I could find a way through it, or how I could still get on with other aspects of life. For me, it's also what I've been told, which is that we all do come out the other side of whatever is going on. We all wake up the next day, unless we don't. That's another thing. But generally, life goes on, and you decenter yourself from the problem, and you find yourself, life goes on. And when it comes to more what do we do with this overwhelming feeling that we all have around the state of change, how the world is just not running in any of the ways that it promised us when we were growing up. I mean, I am a child who learned about democracy, who learned about post-colonial freedom, the independence movement, self-determination, civics, all the things that make a good society. At that time, you know, when I was doing this in the 80s, same time as this music came out, the post-colonial project was in full swing. The people running India were trying to create their version of India, which was still based on parliamentary democracy, etc. We had a judiciary. We talked about all of this wonderful stuff, and you see globally all of these systems collapsing, all of these systems suddenly being corrupted or changed by power and by different vested interests. And yet at the same time, there's all of this sort of technological optimism in the world about the democratization of media, about the fact that suddenly everyone is more informed, but informed with what? And you have Elon Musk, you know, though recently after his behavior on the Ukraine, I'm loath to sort of bring his name up, but at the same time, you know, he's like, we need a planetary backup plan because this planet is going to crap. Ironically enough, he also makes electric cars, trying to stop this planet from going to crack, but he's trying to build a colony on Mars. And he was inspired by, and I bring this up now, this trilogy by Isaac Asimov called the Foundation Trilogy. And for those for those who don't know what the Foundation Trilogy is, hi Melissa. For those who don't know what the Foundation Trilogy is, it tells the story of a galactic empire on the verge of collapse. And this psychohistorian called Harry Seldon, who looked at sort of mass psychology. There was this fictional science called psychohistory, where he could predict how masses would behave through data and extensive stuff. And he said the galactic empire that's run for like a millennia is going to collapse. And it's going to be followed by 100,000 years of the Dark Ages. And you know, all of this stuff that the galactic empire has going for it is just going to crumble before a new civilization emerges on its ruins. And Harry Seldon was branded a heretic by the galactic empire, but instead of facing death, he managed to convince them that said, look, if I'm wrong, just banish me to a planet on the corner of the galaxy. And if I'm wrong, and let me run a research and archival documentation system over there that just documents the galactic empire. And if I'm wrong, great, you have this wonderful archive. And if I'm right, then it'll be a place for people to stay and I'll be out of your way. And they happily did that. And it turned out it was a Trojan horse, because what he'd done was basically he was documenting all the things that would help civilization reduce the Dark Ages from 100,000 years to 1,000 years. And so he had a plan for how to span the interregnum and how to fast track that. And you read it and you get fascinated by the fact that the Galactic Empire falls in the first book, and the Foundation starts to become a new center of power because it has technology and all of that. And then it goes through its commerce system. But in the second book, and this is all science and tech. And one of the things he didn't take out there was psychohistory. And in the second book, he speaks of a second foundation that was created in secret on the home planet of the original galaxy. And the second foundation were psychohistorians. And the psychohistorians were keeping the sort of map of how the first foundation was going to go and shepherding it to see that it followed his plan. But for me, coming back to us, so you've got Elon Musk saying, I've got to create a plan B civilization on Mars, and it's all technology, etc. I know this is out there, but just bear with me for a bit, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The eye rolling is a compulsive thing I do whenever I hear that particular.
Yeah. But my point being, you know, and you think about technology and you think about digital media and you think about, like, we talk about even humanity is going to be humanity 2.0. At some point, there's going to be, like, we already are cyborgs because we're already addicted to these. We're going to be further cyborgs, eventually man, mind, machine, meld. Who knows what's going to replace human civilization, like Homo technos or whatever, right? Yuval Noah Harari says Homo Deus. And they talk about AI and how AI is going to possibly destroy the world. But AI is a creature or something that is created out of us humans. And so how do you then, get AI to be, for example, Buddhist? Or how do you get AI to be a humanist? Or Asimov also does this beautiful thing called the 3 laws of robotics, which are these binding constitutional laws in the DNA of a robot that allow robots to serve humankind and also serve themselves, but not at the expense of humankind. So this is sort of the grand landscape against which I go, okay, but we are here now. And I feel like when I started the drama school, I really was interested in creating an ecosystem for theater in which I could practice theater as product. I wanted to create a theater space, a theater industry, and all of that. And in the 10-year journey, the conversations that stayed with me and the things that stayed with me was what it did to the people coming through the school. The parents coming in saying, I didn't recognize my child. The idea that it has such a transformational quality at the level of the individual and such a transformational quality at the level of groups and ensembles and communities, that I was just like, this is why I do theater. I don't really do theater for that product. And I could talk about that a bit later also. And then I find myself coming back. So the reason I'm feeling fine about it is because, I feel like we could come up with, I think theater as a knowledge system, theater as the thing that you experience then does to you and does to those around you who are having a shared experience of it, not as a consumer, but as a participant in theater or in theater practice or in the knowledge system itself. I think that's actually our psychohistory. I think that like, if you think about everything that you had happen to you as an individual, what theater has done for you personally, how it has taken you to a space of self-awareness, to a space of being able to stay in resilience and conflict. The fact that I'm not collapsed in a heap right now because of what's going on in my personal life and able to sort of somewhere build on things, or still move forward. The show must go on. I must hold space for others. People will hold space for me. All of that, which we take for granted amongst us in the community, why can't we put that out into the world as something that everyone should have a fair share of? And I think that it is our it could be, theater as a knowledge system has the potential to be our psychohistory to the first foundation, which is a new colony on Mars. And so the world might be going to hell in a handbasket in many different ways. And we can get to that also. I mean, like, the world is going to hell in a handbasket in many different ways. And we're all sitting around feeling very disenfranchised, disempowered. The idea that we really can't, there's nothing we can do about the huge tectonic shifts that are happening. I mean, it is ridiculous that a democracy is considering voting Donald Trump back into power. It is ridiculous that 2 days ago, when the UK was trying to figure out who's their new leader is, they actually were like toying with the idea of Boris Johnson coming back. How broken is everyone can see the systems are broken. And so we can see the fall of our galactic empire happening in front of our eyes. We can see conversations around the fact that capitalism has failed. It can't be the driver of everything anymore. So where is this new solution? And I feel that the new solution is, and if we go back to almost our first season, when we talked about globalization, right? Globalization was the driving force. Late stage capitalism, neoliberal project was the driving force that got many countries into democracies and all of that stuff. And now we see the fag end of that, and what it is problematic because it's not giving us. It then goes into the same systems of democracy and all who got now corrupted by capitalism, corrupted by neoliberal thinking, etc. I'm using these terms very broadly. Forgive me. I am a layperson, and I think that maybe theater as a knowledge system somewhere has the solution of reversing it, because we've talked about the first season about not globalization, but planetarity, being one with the planet, coming from the grassroots, coming from a response. It's Spivak's term. And so how do we bring that to life in a way that those become the new tall trees that carry us forward? I mean, it's really funny. I just happened to see a YouTube documentary the other day about how they're trying to see if they can grow skyscrapers.
I think I saw something about that as well.
I saw something about that, right? And I'm just thinking, okay, there's
organic
yeah,
kind
an
of
organicity and all of that
Hmm.
for a population of 10 billion. And that's the right kind of thinking, but can it happen in this sort of scale? Like, how do we take this dark ages from 100,000 years to 1,000 years? And I think that it's going to be theater. I think theater as a knowledge system has a very strong part of that solution.
Yeah,
That's
I think
so that's why I feel fine.
that was an epic long walk. And you've brought up a lot of really interesting things on your way to this destination that I'd like to pick out and perhaps sit a little with more. So I love that you began with Asimov's Foundation trilogy, which I haven't read myself, but the concept makes perfect sense to me, right? And what that foregrounds to me is this tension between the repository of knowledge, right? These knowledges, perhaps in plural, how those are kept sustained, transmitted, engaged with in particular ways. And then there's this question of what we do with that knowledge and how we mobilize that knowledge, right, to actually kind of manifest things in the world. And you kind of, mentioned Donald Trump, you mentioned kind of global politics and this going to hell in a handbasket. In many ways, to me, as an expression of exactly that issue, right, is this open-ended access to knowledge and people's inability to, I think, evaluate the validity of some types or forms of knowledge as opposed to others. Everything ends up sitting on the same conceptual level for people. So we aren't able to distinguish, for example, between more valid forms of truth than others, for example, right?
Yeah.
Which is how we end up with the right-wing resurgence in the Americas, for example. I mean, in the United States, for example. So there is something about this tension between what is known and how we mobilize that knowledge to produce the world that we collectively inhabit.
So
Then
how do
the
we?
other,
No,
yeah.
Finished.
And then the other kind of quick connection that I was making here is this question of theater not as product but as process. And that to me sits in the same domain, I think, as this latter proposition, that perhaps it's not about the archive or about the repository of knowledge itself, but about what we do with the knowledge. And that to me is the same sort of thinking that is animating your belief in the positive, generative things that theater can do. Is that if we shift our attention from the idea of products that are consumed, that in some ways are epistemically closed, if you will, right? And rather lean into what the practice of working collectively with other people in space and time to arrive at something is actually where the magic of theater is happening. It's actually where we're negotiating the meaning of these knowledges. So I agree with you that theater absolutely is a knowledge system, but I also think it's a means through which to begin to reflexively interrogate and really kind of apply pressure to the concept of these knowledges as fixed, right? That if you can, but remember, yeah.
So there are three things that I think need to happen. One is, and it comes to this thing. I mean, if you look at capitalism and we look at art and culture as product, we have a problem.
Exactly.
Right? Art and culture for consumption. Oh, let's go and see let's go and see the Rembrandt's lilies, or I can't remember, Monet's lilies in the Louvre or wherever it was. That's what is it going to do for you? It's doing a few things for you at an individual consumption level. And I find that art much more interesting right now when the Extinction Rebellion goes and glues themselves to it and tries and throws paint on it. And that is theater, that is community, that is participation. Yes, sure, it's rebellion and revolt and a form of protest, but somewhere in there lies the kernel of art as process versus art as product, right? Or culture as process versus culture as product. And this is the problem with capitalism. It's what it's done to all of us in the theater community, or all of us artists, creators. We shouldn't be. We should be artist processors, or process gods. Look at me, megalomaniac. Okay, but my point being, I think that we have to look at our practice as the product, if at all. And our practice is and it's how do we get that mindset shift in our community? I was going through a visioning exercise with a consultant group, and they, in order to say how do I make theater accessible to the masses as a participatory thing. And let me bring in another two analogies over here. What I'm speaking of is this. We all, many of us have familiar with or practice yoga, right? We've understood it, we've lived it, we've tried it out. Yoga does this thing intrinsically for our spirit, for our mind, for our body, and it's a movement, and it's a holistic practice for the individual betterment. And I actually think the theatrical knowledge system is a community level yoga, because it's helping for a social being. It's helping the social being holistically develop, because you practice theater as a community. You practice theater not as an individual. And I think that's really an important thing about this. And remind me to come up with this vaccination pandemic analogy as well when we go about tribalism, or the problem of the mob. But sorry, I'm preempting Ngeni a bit. But the second thing is that we as theater practitioners need to say, what was done to us, can we give that on to others so that they can do it to others? So for me, a translatable game, a translatable tool, a translatable exercise becomes much more important, because once a participant has done it, they can further recreate it and give it to somebody else. And sure, it will change in form and scope and sequence. It will take a life of its own. It's like there are 65,000 variations of zip zap boing, or of the push pull exercise, or of whatever, right? Everyone has a variation because every instructor made it their own. But the community participating in it can then subsequently do that. And I think that that's where in the visioning exercise, I found myself when the consultant said, so how many million people do you want to impact? And then how many theater schools do you have to open? Or how many theater-based social engineers do you have to create?
The inevitable cost-benefit analysis.
And it was doing all of that. And I said, no, my vision statement is not. My vision statement is something like theater should be a part of everyone's everyday experience. It should be a ubiquitous part of everybody's experience. And when you say that, you shift gears and you go, okay, because the person sitting down and making yoga a global movement, it wasn't one person. It got a life of its own, and now yoga is known the world over, right? And we've got to add this sort of this practitioner's meme into our society. And the knowledge system then will go on, of course, to affect how people. So, I imagine that then that gives communities a space to recognize themselves, articulate their own voices, and not be so moved by the huge, what seemingly tectonic shifts. That is basically a lot of noise and a huge sound and light Soleil Lumiere show being thrown on us by media and late stage capitalism and the existing power structures that are trying to get us to think in a particular way. So I actually think that we could enlighten or live at a higher order of self-actualization at a community level, at a civilizational level, versus going back down to the lowest common denominator each time and becoming the mob. Sorry, I kind of went tangential, but did I say something? No, I meant.
Tangents are delicious. Tangents offer new visitors for us to look upon before we head back to the main road. And in fact, are the most interesting part of conversations like this, including this one. So I love that you brought up Extinction Rebellion's protest actions, right, where they're deliberately intervening in these kind of fixed, if you will, repositories that are valued in a particular way because of their seeming unchangingness. And the theatricality of protest in that instance for me is reminding me of a conversation that we had in the second season of Bayo. I don't know if that's right, where he was talking about theater and performance reminding us that thinking is always already proprioceptive, that it's oriented to the body, it happens in bodies. and what that intervention that they're doing, you know, by attacking, if you will, these privileged art objects in frames behind glass walls in these museums, is perhaps reinserting or using theatricality as a way of remobilizing, reactivating those objects as things that have the potential to move, right? And to shape how we experience the world. Whether it's at a kind of deeper conceptual level of the artwork itself, or at the more obvious level of we invest so much time and money and effort into creating these kinds of repositories when the world that they are supposed to give, I guess, expression to is literally burning down around us. So where is the actual value in a Manet on a wall when the world that he reflected in the painting is no longer one, you know? So that kind of insertion of theatricality back into what is ultimately static form takes me back to the Foundation trilogy and this idea of, you know, the knowledge as a static thing that has to be revivified over and over and over again. And that I don't use revivified accidentally, but you know, this idea of vivre, to live, right? It's made a living thing again. And what I'm hearing you suggest is that one of the ways that theatricality or theatrics of performance does that is by enabling these kind of collective moments, is for us to not necessarily sit within a system that we feel incapable of engaging with, because its power and scale is so sublime that we can't kind of wrap our arms around it. There's also another kind of funny saying, I forget who I heard this from, apparently it's an African proverb, which asks the question, what's the best way to eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. So perhaps what this turn back to the proprioceptive, to the active, to the collective, and what it initiates is this practice of recognizing, I may not eat the whole damn elephant, but I can sure as fuck take little bites out of it. And in different places, and that is somehow doing something, right? That helps us sustain us in other ways.
Well, when you
so I love this idea of consensus, and I love this idea that theater, perhaps, and I'm fully, you know, alert to this possibility that we may even romanticize performance's capacity to do these things. I'm going to hold that off for a moment and indulge my romantic sensibility. That theatre helps us to imagine collectively, to imagine generatively as collectives, to build consensus, and to perhaps imagine then in the failures of this kind of late capitalist modernity that we find ourselves in, and in our attempts to imagine something new, is that it helps us to arrive at these consensuses for what a kind of...
It allows communities to sit with complexity. It allows communities to sit with complexity and to not look at everything in a black and white manner. And when you come to how do you eat the elephant one step at a time, I suddenly am reminded of that that movie about this arms dealer who was, like, you know, jet setting around the world, trying to get his arms shipped to some remote African nation, and he hires an Antonov. It was played by George Clooney. He hires an Antonov Russian plane and manages to get a whole shipload of. He loses his shipment. He's in a bad way, but he's left sitting on the side of this plane that is broken down on some dirt road in the middle of a nation in Central Africa, and they go into this slow motion thing where different people from different places just keep coming to the plane and scavenging it for metal, and in no time at all, thousands of people coming and going in their own time over like 5 day-night cycles, and the plane is reduced to like like it literally looked like a stop motion of ants decomposing a body.
Yeah.
Right. And so I really do think that you don't eat the elephant one bite at a time. You eat the elephant with 10,000 ants, and you eat the elephant with 10, and each of those ants is a circle of people, a community, and that's how you engage with the system. And we've seen microcosm ideas about this. You have Devi in Andhra Pradesh who ran a newspaper called Prajanatya Mandal. Falguni, if you can find that and stick it up, run by a lady called Devi, please. where they just wanted to create a newsletter for local issues. And then they found themselves creating theater groups in each village enabled by the women. And suddenly there were like 100 villages. Each one of them had a theater community, a theater circle where they did theater and practiced theater amongst other things that they did in life. And this newsletter worked. And finally, they managed to get alcohol out of these villages. They managed to get local MLAs who are playing huge power, members of the politicos, to start bending to their will. And the district collector very happily cooperating with them because he had no choice. So the bureaucracy working. So because they'd empowered all of these people to eat or engage with the elephant, to digest the elephant. And we've seen it with Boal and his work. And I think these are microcosm examples. And can these things be amplified, scaled, turned into a movement, not homogenized? Not homogenized. We should think about that. And how do we then recreate those models in different places? And I think the third thing that I didn't say was theater also needs to stop, even the theater as a knowledge system, theater as a process needs to stop being a product in itself as well. So for example, I will only go and engage with a community where I want to engage with everybody, but I can only go where the funding takes me, or I can only go where, theater comes in at the last minute when
It
in the
becomes a
worst case.
self-reinforcing kind of echo chamber in some ways, right? Yeah.
And we've got to sort of say that, no, let's even take applied theater and explode the notion into just theater as a knowledge system for everyone, for everyday practice, or for ongoing practice in everybody's lives, for community building, for community voice, for all of that. And whilst we're going for that gigantic goal, it's not as if the theater makers that are being created won't also infuse media systems and stuff and all of that. Sorry, shut up.
No. Amy, sorry, I want to pick up on this again. The tools, I guess, or the things about theatre that can be generatively mobilized to, again, help us envision democratic futures in kind of ever more capacious ways. And as we suggested earlier on, it seems to be about this recognizing this. Sometimes my English escapes me, is recognizing the usefulness of processes over the products that those processes produce, right? And Amy made an interesting point there in the chat, and I don't know if you want to speak to this, Amy, where it says we aren't looking for ways in which product and process we're looking for ways in which product and process become seamlessly interwoven. Can you speak to that example of your experience of Indian theatre as a reference for product, which is process, a religious process? And I think maybe what you're gesturing towards is that idea of kind of theatre and performance as grounded in ritual, which is always about, in some ways, achieving something, though again, the achieved thing is less tangible, perhaps, than.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm so intrigued by this, by how you immediately identified this really crucial issue of, like, are we talking about theater the product or theater the process? And every time we're talking about how transformative theater is, we seem to be referring to classrooms. So what's the difference between a group of students who are coming to a classroom really expecting to give themselves to a process in which they will be transformed, and the audience at the National, who probably go into a pretty static state as soon as they take their seat, and the kind of trying to find something that defies those two paradigms would be my experience of Balinese theater, or like certain Indian theaters, where the audience is really coming expecting to go into trance, expecting to experience divinity, expecting to be really part of this event. And you can't just manufacture that. You can't just say, okay, happy clappy people, now we're gonna force you to come on stage and make you participate in uncomfortable social situations. I mean, it's really about a kind of framing for what the process, I mean, the frame, what the audience understands this thing to be has so much to do with whether or not it's a knowledge system or a library, a museum. And maybe even what you're referring to, like this gluing yourself to the, the Monet, is like, that's the frame that didn't exist. People weren't expecting that. That suddenly came up as a shocking new reframing of that experience. We're not in a museum, we're actually in a politically contested space. So this is, I mean, somehow the knowledge system, I think it would be, I'm looking for the ways in which we can talk about it as something that reframes the situation into an active state. So that the shift occurs. I mean, you mentioned yoga, so that it becomes actually, it's not just you don't do it so that you achieve musculature. You're actually expecting this thing that you're doing to take you someplace, that would have to be part of the yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, it moves you affectively, but also in a kind of more conceptual way as well, right? And that's what I was kind of gesturing towards when I was talking about Beo's idea of thinking as proprioceptive.
So,
I've got you, Jehan, in 1 second. And the other thing I think, Amy, that I'm picking up here is your reminder, I think, and it's a timely one, that even in those moments where people kind of give themselves over to experiencing, participating, a particular theatrical or performance moment, is that's usually always already framed by some kind of investment in that process. So I think you're bang on here in asking this question about the different kinds of publics, like, that theatre is engaging with, or our conception of theatre and performance is engaging with. There's the kind of scholarly public, there's the kind of pedagogic space where we are, you have students coming in to learn who are already invested again in what we're doing. You have audiences coming to consume, perhaps to participate, to consume in more open-ended ways, but nevertheless arriving with an investment. So a question that I have in that context, and the context where we're accepting and recognizing theatre and performance as a tool that can work not just in those contexts, but more broadly across society, is how do we inculcate that same kind of recognition or investment in the process for people who might not be drawn towards this thing called performance or theatre? How do we preach to people who aren't in the choir already? How do we pass those tools on to people who may not have ever even conceived of something called theatre and performance as an explicit thing, as a process? Yeah.
Let me position the two extremes that Amy spoke about in terms of the frames. The drama school frame is what I know and I'm familiar with. And I've told the students to their faces that we are pulling a bait and switch here. First of all, you came here thinking you wanted to be actors, and we're actually turning into actor, creator, entrepreneurs, and here's why. And then I said, actually, beyond that, the other bait and switch is, I'm really not interested in whether you go out and ever put a play up in your life. I'm interested in the fact that you're going to be a better human being who's able to leave society better than you found it. And so over there, they get it. And yes, they can also act, because that was my original contract with them, right? I'm not doing it at the exclusion of the other. I look at on the other side, I look at the proscenium or the ark or the National Theatre as a temple, where the codified theatre, rituals of theatre, all of that exist. And that could be a destination for some, but that's religion. That's not spirituality, if that makes sense. And spirituality lies on the road to making those plays or to participating in those plays. And then coming back to what you said about, the sort of the proprioceptive, is that right?
Yeah, proprioceptive.
Yeah, proprioceptive needs. I mean, we talk about all these artists. Oh, they moved me. This product moved me. I wanted to be moved. Moved you in your seat, moved you to think. Take that step further, move the person, and then I'm really in an optimistic place, because I've always seen it. If you build it, they will come. I just know that for a fact. If you build it, they will come. If you sit somewhere and start doing something, people stop and watch. If you then extend the hand of participation, people start to participate. We all have I mean, yoga is working because finally, from that same table of lots of systems being available, yoga suddenly stood out because people recognize an inherent value in it that they could resonate with. And everybody I have seen who participates in theater, however, like okay, let's get a bunch of people in the family living room. Let's get a bunch of people together, just a bunch of friends. And let's put on a play. Let's spend half an hour putting on a play, a 5-minute skit. That's the challenge, right? Sure, they put on the skit, they had fun. But if you sit down for 20 minutes afterwards and have a reflection with them, they talk about how it spoke to so many things in who they were as people and who they were as communing people, as social beings. And it also helps at the individual self-awareness level, how I negotiate conflict, how I get a sense of how I didn't see a person in a certain light until I saw them do this. And we get that at corporate training workshops and all of that. It just happened that we were teaching this in a drama school. What happens if we just go and like start the theater circle in a park? What happens if we go and start it in some other place? People will watch, people will be intrigued, and as they see it, they will spread the gospel. And the gospel will not be a single homogeneous gospel. It won't be the Sermon from the Mount. It will be, I like to say this, at least at the drama school level, is that if I have 15 students in the room, there are 15 pedagogies going on in the room, because pedagogy exists at the site of being received, not at the site of being delivered. And so this plurality that lies there in the experience is that the person, if I do this work with a community in a space and they are excited about it, which I think they always are, if it's done well, then they will go off and say, we've got to do this. This was fun. But it's their own experience of it that they are preaching, not my experience of it that they are preaching. So if I had 15 people in my community circle and those 15 people went on to do it with 15 other people, it would continue. But the essence, the spine,
kind of paying forward method.
Yeah. And I think that's where I see it. I don't know yet how we make it ubiquitously accessible, how it stands out as a solution. But what I am actually doing at the funding level, in this world that we currently live in, because Harry Seldon, psychohistorian, got his funding from the empire to start the foundation. I'm walking into every room where they're talking about corporate social responsibility, and I'm speaking about how theater will give you a better society by giving you better individuals within it. And I talk to them about, do you remember when you were in the school play? And 8 out of 10 times, because 2 of them will tell them I was a tree and I was mortified. But 8 out of 10 times, they will talk about how much fun it was and how much they remembered it. And I was like, now, and what it did for me. And you get a buy-in from people who are now CEOs of companies. You get a buy-in from other people who realize that community participation, etc., is important. And you say that if I can do this for you, if you know it can do it for an individual, what happens if I can make it accessible to millions? And that's where they're actually buying that idea and funding it. They're giving us money to build accessibility and get people to live higher order versions of themselves. And maybe I'm romanticizing it, but I'm just trying to transfer my experience of what theater did for me to somebody else. And it's a real lived experience. And I've seen from everybody around me who's done it, I've seen real lived experiences. And of course, there are some horrible, I'm just reminded about a conversation that was had with me. But it's not foolproof. But if we can get to 90% of them.
I love this idea of perhaps it being less about creating formal systems or spaces of formal encounter, but rather about having people recognize how their lives have always already been entangled in performance in some way or the other. And in that recognition is finding ways for them to help other people to recognize that. And suddenly you're in a space where there is this kind of, again, sure, romantic sense of what these things are doing for us, but that increasing recognition then kind of almost normalizes, if you will, this move back towards again these more dynamic ways of inhabiting the world and thinking. But again, I think Amy raises a crucial point here. And Amy, I'm going to read it exactly as it is because it's so elegantly put, but again, if it speaks to this, and Jehan as well. Amy says, isn't it crucial to unhook the product from its reification via money? As he said, Jehan, the theatre circle in the park is a gratuitous act of theatre, as was the Monet-Glen event. We are arguing ourselves out of careers, but hey. So I think that recognizes on one hand that there is a real politic, there is a kind of instrumental logic that subtends, I think, all of our endeavors in this regard, because at the end of the day, no matter how well-intentioned and how, you know, touchy-feely and fuzzy my practice may get, how well I, you know, form these community spaces, there is also the imperative to sustain oneself in a very material sense. I need a roof over my head, I need water, I need to eat, right? So there is some kind of tension between the status of art and performance and theater as career pathways, as pathways to accrue capital in a literal and necessary sense, and recognizing its symbolic value and how in some ways there's an uneasy tension between those two functions that we simultaneously fulfill as artists, is as working people, as an actual form of labor, and then as this kind of affective intellectual labor as well, that perhaps is polluted, for want of a better word, is diminished by this filthy concern with the vagaries of money, right?
Let me come at that sideways.
Please come at me sideways.
No, I come at the idea sideways. One of the things I was thinking about, first of all, I just want to say that yoga instructors get paid.
Well, that's the point that I wanted to make as well.
Hold on, one sec. Let me. Yoga instructors get paid, okay? And you have hot yoga, and you have Bikram yoga, and you have this yoga, and you have that yoga, and you have the spiritual yoga who's like a yoga instructor who's just doing it because they like yoga. But they get paid. Their material needs are met. That's the first one. The second one is I was talking to the system where we have to look out for our well-being, the roof of our heads, etc. We are speaking of it, and you are coming at it from a notion of, well, we live in a capitalist society in which money matters and food and all, but the same capitalist society is crumbling around you. And so how are you when the system fails, it's not going to be able to pay anyone, let alone you. Okay. So what's your alternative source of survival, of thriving, of another sustainable way of living? And then you're going to have to start thinking about that anyway. So start a two-track process, right? I remember Felipe Cervera saying that, you know, maybe the drama schools are ossified, the ones that exist in university systems and all, and things like Lecoq or things like different initiatives that exist across the world that are trying to do something new and different and adapt and are resilient. Maybe they just have to have some kind of a symbiotic relationship, or some kind of a, what do you call it? What are those eels that, moray eels that like sort of cling themselves to sharks? A parasitic relationship. You know, you do something like that in order to get money out of the system, in order to fund this movement or this idea or the genesis of this thing. Exactly what Harry Seldon did with the first foundation and the second foundation from the emperor. Okay, so he did it. So I should go asking Elon Musk for funding, clearly.
Apparently he's going to be trying to keep his private security in line after his cryptocurrency fails to be of any actual value in doing so. I actually did read the article as well, Amy, now that you pointed out. I just realized.
So then how do we survive the monetary collapse and all? It becomes a question. If you think about this, if the apocalypse comes and all these systems fail us, it's the communities that band together. I mean, you saw it during the pandemic. It's the communities that banded together. Suddenly you had this crisis, and then you suddenly saw what community could do for each other because nobody else was doing anything for them. I mean, even my urban building of very, you know, happy, rich South Bombay people suddenly banded together, were talking to each other about, you know, looking after the security teams, feeding everybody who's all the staff in the building. Only one person could go out from a building at a time, so doing grocery runs for everybody. And you saw community come together around the crisis. Now imagine if the communities were already ready because they had already banded together, they had already done things together, they had already started to speak about issues that were relevant. Do they need to wait for the crisis to suddenly become a T cell or to become something that does this? I was talking to I'm just trying to remember her name. It escapes me a little bit. Michaela, she's an arts entrepreneur who teaches out of a university in the Czech Republic. And we wanted to go on to a project of, if you look at the health readiness of a nation based on how many doctors they have per 1,000 people, 3 doctors per 1,000 people, 15 doctors per 1,000 people, you know, a sense. Let's look at the socio-emotional health of a nation by how many arts practitioners or cultural practitioners. I'm going to take this one step further. How many participatory arts practitioners, how many participatory cultural practitioners they have per 1,000 people. And suddenly you have a healthy society, because it's not Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Sorry, I'm jumping again, where you first, you know, I might be hungry and starving, but I will still sing a song to quiet my stomach. I still have expression. I still have need. I will still find ways of doing things. It's not an actualization like this. It's a much flatter structure. That's my feeling, but I have never starved, so touch wood. So I don't actually know, but I really feel like, I really do feel like culture speaks to us. Culture feeds us in our hearts and souls. Participating in it feeds us in our hearts and souls, and therefore that's how we go forward. Yeah, so yeah.
No, thank you, Jehan. I think your thinking and mine is moving in much the same direction, and recognizes, I think, the pitfalls of overly romanticizing what we're doing, while also recognizing it's an incredibly kind of potent value, if but we allow ourselves to do so. I wonder if, yeah, so I'm really interested to hear if there are any kind of responses from our gathered guests, any offerings. If you do have anything, please, by all means, feel free to come off camera and just chat, or to put something in the chat, which I'm happy to read out. But there was, hold on, I made a note here to go back to some, oh, right, so this idea of collectives and consensus. I really like how you're talking about, I think, moving towards not a vertical hierarchy of needs, but kind of an almost horizontal formation where all of those things are in kind of tension with one another, but you know, the one need doesn't necessarily prevent you from engaging in or participating in this other thing that perhaps may help to ameliorate the sense of lack, right, that need speaks to. But there is this thing that I find complicated to think about when you talk about collectives and consensus, right? So theatre, through the mode of, let's call it proprioceptive thinking that it demands of us, our sense of connection to perhaps not a global capitalistic world, but a planetary, organic, rhizomatic one, where we connect in eccentric but very generative ways with multiplicities, where we can be individuals but always entangled with and among others. If those are the things that performance allows us and compels us to recognize, and those are the essential tools, if you will, the competencies perhaps, that it confers upon us that enable us to envisage and to enact the world in ever more generative ways, I wonder then what the corollary might be as well, knowing that consensus can often become reified as a status quo. That consensus always means that dissensus, dissenting opinion, again, failure of the English there, perhaps becomes diminished in favor of the collective value of us speaking together, means that perhaps we become less attuned to hearing the voices that may be speaking to the side of the collective voice. So I'm also wondering how we make space for dissent, for revolt, in processes where kind of positive movement does in some ways rely on recognizing a public, right? A polis, a people, whom we necessarily have to hold at the center of whatever, work we're doing to better the world.
So, I don't know, because yes, I do know. I do know. I do know. I have a belief. First of all, it was theatrics, and theatricality that gave us Adolf Hitler. It gave us the clown that is Donald Trump. Gave us the demagogue that is Narendra Modi or Erdogan. There is a lot of theatricality in what they do. So theater can be subverted.
Argue that they are only able to do what they do because of their very present awareness of the power of their theatrical self-presentation.
Yes.
Right?
So that's what happens when it goes systemically up to the top, and it's run by power. I mean, even Breitbart, who ran, yeah, but I mean, even Breitbart said culture lies upstream of politics. So how do you appropriate culture, or how do you get culture to be democratized again? I think I just want to take a small diversion, but if we remember the relationship between theater in the Greek amphitheaters and the birth of Athenian democracy, where I think it all matched scale for scale. I think that then what happened to democracy as it became civilizational, etc., technology, media, and capitalism, etc., is what took it forward. And then this seeing place got diminished. This theater as a participatory knowledge system got diminished. And how do we get that to catch up? And I think that the driver of democracy 2.0, or the driver of democracy theater 0.0, can't be a capitalism. It has to be something that is more community-based, something that is more, because theater has the tool to make democracy for the demos. Theater has the tool to get emergent leaders come out of a community circle, for example, right? People who lead a group of people suddenly understand the voice of the group because they've learned to live with complexity. The title, so this is where I think that I just found myself writing down democracy 2.0 at this point, because it became really important to me to share that maybe we somewhere have the knowledge system that could power could empower communities to power true democracy, could empower communities to democratize power. And then it comes to the second one, is what happens when you have a hegemonic idea that suddenly emerges? What happens if the consensus group decides to have the Salem witch trials again? I don't know. I think that will be part of the process and part of the journey. I think that the iterations will eventually take those off the table. And I think horrific things might also happen. But as long as you pluralize it, and as long as you democratize it as much as possible, then I don't think, I also think these things happen when there's monolithic thought processes at play. When there are these sort of binding, Yuval Noah Harari talks about how we all shared imagination. That's why we believed in money and currency. And that's how we could go and expand from a tribe of 20 to running a village of 200. Because we all believed in a single thing, even though it was a fiction.
It's collective intention. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a collective fiction that we all buy into. You can't eat neoliberalism. You can't eat democracy. It's a fiction, right? But we all subscribe to it. Therefore, it happens. So what happens if the fiction is a very complex fiction, and it's a multi-layered, multi-storied strand that is pluralistic in its nature? So there's no, it's a story of not of black and white. It's a story of perpetual tension.
Which takes us back to process, right? Because that,
and there's a narrative, but these are the narratives that came from the 10,000 ants eating the elephant. Yet a single elephant got eaten. I don't know if that analogy holds beyond that. So shut up.
and transmute it into something else, right? Because the eating also produces effluent, which becomes productive in its own way. I'm going to pause us there and just point out that it's 5 minutes past the hour. So we are through the official recorded portion of the talk, but we will continue chatting for about another 10-15 minutes before we formally conclude and then continue with the water cooler chat for however long people want to hang out after that.